The air was thick with the acrid tang of smoke and blood, the Tiber River reflecting flames that licked the night sky. On the Palatine Hill, the young warrior Lucius Tarquinius stood frozen, his bronze armor glinting under the flickering torches. Below, the Etruscan army surged against Rome's fragile wooden palisades, their war cries a guttural roar that shook the earth. It was 509 BCE, and Rome, little more than a cluster of mud-brick huts and dreams, was on the brink of annihilation. Lucius gripped his gladius, his knuckles white, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and defiance. He was no king, no senator, just a farmer's son who had sworn to protect his home. But tonight, the gods themselves seemed to turn their backs. "Hold the line!" bellowed Centurion Marcus, his voice hoarse as he rallied the defenders. A spear sailed past Lucius, grazing his cheek, drawing a hot line of blood. He stumbled but caught himself, his eyes locked on the Etruscan banners fluttering like vultures' wings. The Etruscans, masters of central Italy, had ruled Rome for a century through their kings, but now the city had rebelled, casting out Tarquin the Proud. The Etruscans wanted their puppet king back, and they would burn Rome to ashes to do it. Lucius's breath hitched as he remembered his father's words. "Rome is more than walls, boy. It's an idea." But ideas couldn't stop swords. As the first Etruscan warriors breached the palisade, Lucius charged, his blade flashing. The clash of bronze and screams filled the night, a symphony of chaos that would decide whether Rome would rise or be forgotten. This is the story of Rome's birth, not as a glittering empire but as a desperate city-state fighting for survival against the Etruscan juggernaut. It is a tale of betrayal, sacrifice, and the unyielding will to forge a destiny. From the ashes of this night, a legend would be born, one that would echo through the ages. The rebellion began with a whisper in the Forum, months before the siege. Rome's streets buzzed with unrest, the air heavy with the scent of olive oil and sweat. The Etruscan king, Tarquin the Proud, ruled with an iron fist, his opulent palace on the Capitoline Hill a stark contrast to the squalor of the plebeians below. His taxes crushed farmers, his decrees silenced dissent, and his son's crimes, none more infamous than the rape of Lucretia, ignited a fire no throne could extinguish. In a dimly lit tavern near the Tiber, a group of conspirators gathered. Among them was Lucius Junius Brutus, a wiry man with eyes like burning coals, his hatred for Tarquin a living thing. "He's no king," Brutus hissed, his voice low but venomous. "He's a leech sucking Rome dry." Across the table, Collatinus, Lucretia's husband, clenched his fists, his grief a raw wound. Lucretia's suicide, her blood staining the marble of her home, had become the rallying cry for revolution. "We end this tonight," Collatinus said, his voice trembling with rage. For her, for Rome, the plan was audacious. Infiltrate the palace, seize Tarquin, and declare Rome a republic. But Tarquin's spies were everywhere. As the conspirators slipped through the moonless streets, they didn't notice the shadow trailing them. A young Etruscan noble named Aruns, loyal to Tarquin, his dagger gleaming with intent. When the rebels stormed the palace, they found it empty. Tarquin already fled to the Etruscan city of Veii. Aruns had betrayed them, and now the Etruscans were coming. Brutus stood in the Forum the next dawn, his voice carrying over the gathered crowd. "Rome will bow to no king," he roared, holding aloft Lucretia's blood-stained veil. The people cheered, their voices a tidal wave, but fear lingered in their eyes. The Etruscans were not just a rival city. They were a civilization of unmatched wealth and military might. Their bronze-clad legions feared across Italy. Rome's defiance was a spark, but it had ignited a war they could not hope to win. Days later, word came. Tarquin had rallied the Etruscan League, a coalition of city-states led by Veii and Tarquinia. Their armies were marching, their war chariots rumbling like thunder. Rome's fledgling republic, barely a week old, faced annihilation. Brutus, now one of two consuls elected to lead the city, stood on the city walls, watching the horizon darken with dust. "We've woken a giant," he muttered to Collatinus, his friend's face pale. "And now it comes for us." Lucius, the young warrior, was among those conscripted to defend the city. He had never held a sword until a week ago, his hands more accustomed to a plow. As he trained in the shadow of the Palatine, his thoughts churned. "Why am I fighting?" he wondered. "For Brutus? For Rome? Or because I have no choice?" The Etruscans were not faceless enemies to him. His mother had been Etruscan, her stories of their gods and rituals woven into his childhood. Yet here he was, ready to kill her people to save his own. The war unfolded like a storm breaking over the Tiber. The Etruscans struck first at the Janiculum Hill, a strategic ridge across the river. Their chariots tore through Rome's militia, iron wheels crushing bone, their archers raining death from above. Lucius fought in the chaos, his sword heavy, his arms aching. He saw friends fall. Gaius, who dreamed of opening a bakery, speared through the chest. Decimus, who sang bawdy songs, his throat slashed. Each death carved a wound in Lucius's soul, but he fought on, driven by a stubborn refusal to let Rome die. Brutus and Collatinus, leading from the front, were no strangers to loss. Brutus's mind was a battlefield of its own, torn between strategy and guilt. He had known Lucretia since childhood, her laughter a memory that haunted him. If I hadn't pushed for rebellion, would she still live? He thought, dodging an Etruscan javelin. Collatinus, meanwhile, fought with reckless fury, his grief for Lucretia a fire that consumed reason. For her, he screamed, cutting down an Etruscan captain, blood splattering his face. The Etruscans, led by Tarquin and the cunning general Lars Porsena of Clusium, were relentless. Porsena was no mere warlord. He was a tactician who saw Rome's rebellion as an insult to Etruscan dominance. His spies sowed discord within Rome's walls, bribing senators and spreading rumors of betrayal. One night, a Roman guard named Spurius was caught smuggling messages to the Etruscans. Brutus sentenced him to death, his face stone as Spurius begged for mercy. Traitors die, Brutus said, his voice cold, but his hands trembled as the axe fell. Rome was fracturing from within. The turning point came at the Battle of the Sublician Bridge, a narrow wooden span over the Tiber. Porsena's army, thousands strong, aimed to cross it and storm the city. Rome's defenders were outnumbered 10-1, their spears and shields no match for Etruscan bronze. Yet one man, Horatius Cockles, stood defiant. If the bridge falls, Rome falls, he bellowed, his one good eye blazing. With 2 comrades, he held the bridge, hacking at Etruscan warriors as the Romans behind him sawed at the timbers. Lucius, fighting nearby, watched in awe as Horatius stood like a god of war, blood streaming from a dozen wounds. When the bridge collapsed, Horatius dove into the Tiber, his fate unknown. The Etruscans were halted, but at a cost, hundreds dead, the city starving, and morale crumbling. Inside Rome, tensions boiled. The plebeians, hungry and terrified, clashed with the patricians, who hoarded grain in their villas. Brutus faced a mutiny in the Senate, where senators whispered of surrender. "We can't win," one senator, Gaius Valerius, argued. "Porsena offers peace if we restore Tarquin." Brutus slammed his fist on the table. "Peace? He offers chains. We fight or we die as slaves." But even Brutus doubted, his nights plagued by visions of Rome burning. Lucius, too, grappled with despair. His mother, Tanaquil, visited him in secret, her Etruscan accent thick with urgency. "Flee, my son," she pleaded. "The Etruscans will spare you for my sake." Lucius's heart tore in two. He loved his mother, but Rome was his home. "I can't," he whispered, turning away. Tanaquil's sobs echoed in his ears as he returned to the walls, his resolve hardening. Rome was worth fighting for, even if it meant losing everything. The siege reached its zenith in the dead of winter, the Tiber half-frozen, the city's granaries empty. Porsena, frustrated by Rome's resistance, devised a final assault. Under cover of a moonless night, his elite warriors scaled the Capitoline Hill, their ladders silent, their blades poisoned with treachery. Among them was Aruns, the Etruscan noble who had betrayed the rebellion. His mission: kill Brutus and break Rome's spirit. Inside the city, Lucius stood guard on the Capitoline, his breath visible in the frigid air. He heard a faint scrape, a ladder against stone. "To arms!" he shouted, rousing the sleeping defenders. The Etruscans poured over the walls, their eyes glinting like wolves. Lucius fought with desperate ferocity, his sword a blur, but the enemy was too many. He saw Aruns, his face twisted with hate, charging toward the Senate house where Brutus slept. Brutus awoke to chaos, his chamber filled with shouts and clashing steel. He grabbed his gladius and met Aruns in the corridor. "You!" Brutus snarled, recognizing the traitor. Aruns smirked, his blade flashing. "Rome dies tonight, rebel." Their duel was brutal, bronze sparking against bronze, blood pooling on the marble floor. Brutus, older and slower, took a wound to the shoulder but fought on, driven by Lucretia's memory. With a final roar, he drove his sword through Aruns' chest, collapsing as the Etruscan fell. But the battle wasn't over. Porsenna's forces breached the city gates, their war cries echoing through the streets. Lucius rallied the defenders, his voice hoarse but unyielding. "For Rome!" he screamed, leading a desperate charge. The fighting was merciless. Streets slick with blood, houses burning, children screaming. Just as hope seemed lost, a horn sounded from the hills. Roman allies from Ardea and Antium, summoned by Collatinus's desperate pleas, arrived, their spears gleaming. The tide turned, and Porsenna's army faltered. The shocking revelation came at dawn, as the Etruscans retreated. Among the dead was Tarquin the Proud, struck down by an unknown hand. Without their figurehead, the Etruscan League fractured, their unity crumbling. Rome had survived, but at a terrible cost. Brutus, wounded and weak, stood atop the Capitoline, staring at the smoldering city. "We won," he whispered, but his eyes were hollow. The Republic was alive, but its heart was scarred. The aftermath was a city in ruins, yet defiant. The dead were buried in mass graves along the Tiber, their names carved into stone tablets that would one day line the Forum. Lucius, now a hero of the siege, walked among the survivors, his mother's words haunting him. He found her in a refugee camp, her face lined with grief. "You chose Rome," she said softly, no anger in her voice. Lucius nodded, tears in his eyes. "It's home," he said. They embraced, a fragile peace between two worlds. Brutus and Collatinus addressed the Senate, their voices weary but resolute. "Rome is free," Brutus declared. "But freedom is not a gift. It is a burden we carry." The Republic was formalized, its laws etched in bronze, its consuls sworn to serve the people. But the scars of war lingered. Collatinus, unable to bear Rome's memories of Lucretia, left for exile, his parting words to Brutus simple: "Keep her dream alive." The city rebuilt, its walls stronger, its people hardened. Lucius, now a centurion, trained new recruits, his eyes always on the horizon. The Etruscans were not gone. They would return, their cities still powerful, their hatred smoldering. But Rome was no longer a village. It was a republic, a spark that would one day ignite an empire. As spring bloomed, Lucius stood on the Palatine, the Tiber glittering below. He thought of Horatius, of Lucretia, of the thousands who had died. This is Rome, he thought, born in blood, destined for greatness. The city's story was just beginning, its next chapter waiting in the shadows of Carthage, Gaul, and beyond. The gods were watching, and Rome would not disappoint them.